This channel is all about growing plants, growing food, growing worms, and growing people. This video is about growing pineapples and how I grow them on my homestead, and how you can too. After this, you'll never see pineapples the same way again.
Hi growers! According to various AI programs, new pineapple plants can be grown from crowns, leaves, or seeds. But the experts seem to be unanimous that trying to grow them from seeds is typically a bad idea. While it can technically work, eventually, most seeds aren't viable. The ones that actually do manage to sprout take a very long time to grow, and they aren't true to type. That means you could spend a lot of effort trying to get something to grow, and if you actually get fruit from it, there's no telling if it will be any good at all. And as for growing them from leaves, if you believe that's possible and want to know how it's done, just mail a check or money order in 3 easy installments of $19.95 to growyourOwnPineapples.fake.website.com right now. Operators are standing by to take your money. I mean, they want to take your call. Yeah, they want to take your call. Virtually all pineapple plants in the world are grown from the crowns of pineapples. And in this video, I'll show you how to do that. First though, context is important. And for pineapples, that means it's important to know that pineapples are not related to pines or apples.
Pineapple is not a cat.
That's right. A pineapple is not a pine, or an apple, or a cat. But it is a berry. These are pineapples. Well, they used to be. In the 14th through 17th centuries, roughly, if you asked for a pineapple, this is what you would have received. In those times, most fruits were slapped with the label apple. And technically these are fruits from a pine tree, making them pine fruits, and thus pine apples.
Oh!
It took a few hundred years before fruits of the pine trees were generally referred to as pine cones. During that transition, a rare, exotic, luxurious, tropical fruit was becoming popular with people who had a lot of money. And in the early mid-1600s, that fruit, that resembled a pine cone, picked up the name pineapple. Over time, farmers cultivated and multiplied their crops, so that now us common people can enjoy eating pineapples too. Well, except for those Ruby Glow pineapples, those things are $400 each.
Are you kidding me right
Personally, I'm sticking with the ones that grow in my yard. They're free, and they're actually better than store-bought pineapples anyway.
Really? Really?
Yes, really. I'll talk about how important harvesting is on pineapple sweetness in a minute. For now, let's just say that most homegrown produce is better than most store-bought produce. Store-bought pineapples are the best place to get started though. Places like Home Depot do sell pineapple plants for a really high price. Or for a fraction of that, you can buy a regular pineapple from a grocery store, eat it, and then use the leftover scraps from the top to grow your own plant. When I buy pineapples, I no longer search for the best looking fruit. I want good fruit, but it's more important to me to find a healthy looking crown. Because brown leaves indicate dead or dying leaves, I look for leaves that are almost entirely still green. They shouldn't be dried out or withering either. Most importantly, the leaves should still be firmly attached to the fruit. If they break away too easily, it's an indication that the fruit might already be rotting, and that's not good for anything.
Off with his head!
Well, okay then. I'll cut its head off. I use a serrated knife for pineapples because they seem to cut through the very fibrous fruit better. And I cut about a ½ inch from the top of the fruit. For the engineers out there, this doesn't need to be precise. There's no need to break out your measuring tape for this project. After cutting the top, I remove as much of the remaining fruit as I can pull off with my fingers. This is the part that has a high tendency to rot. Therefore, it needs to be removed to reduce that rot and decay from spreading into the plant's core. I actually let mine sit on the counter for a few days to let the fruit remnant dry up a little bit. If you've ever cut potatoes into pieces before planting, this has the same reasoning. You want the fresh cuts to get good airflow so they can dry and generate a sealed surface. This is called curing or healing. During this time, I also put a very little bit of water in the top. Pineapples are bromeliads. And just like other bromeliads in early stages of development, they can pull water and nutrients out of the air. So at this stage, it doesn't need soil and it doesn't need to be submerged in liquid. By adding just a little bit of water in the top, I can simultaneously water the plant while also drying out its base. It can be grown like this for several days, several weeks, or even several months. Planting is easy. The soil doesn't really matter and it doesn't need a lot of space for its roots. For this reason, pineapples are very suitable for growing in pots as well. Although the tops can grow to over 3 feet in all directions. So I recommend against planting them too close to a sidewalk, a screen enclosure, or near any other plants that need a lot of maintenance, because these leaves can be razor sharp and they will hurt you.
Ow! Oh, paper cut, paper cut!
Pineapple plants prefer warm weather, and they really like the sun. They are shade tolerant though, and these are even growing in extreme shade. The trade-off is that with less sunlight, they take longer to grow. In Central Florida, our sun's intensity is a little too much for pineapples. Even though they can survive it, if your sun's intensity is like ours, I recommend planting them in part shade for optimal conditions. Either way, they will take somewhere between 1.5 years to 3 years before the first fruits begin to grow.
And then they die.
When I plant pineapples, I remove a few of the lower leaves. This is more or less optional. From my experience though, roots seem to start growing from the leaf nodes near the bottom. By removing a few of those leaves, it makes it easier for the roots to grow out and down. It also removes the pool of water that forms in those nodes that enables the roots to drink without having to grow. I want them to grow, and so I'm removing those enablers. I put the base of the core into the ground, and I bury a few of the lower leaves too. Then I water it in really well. This does two things. Since there aren't any established roots yet, this helps to stabilize the plant by providing a solid contact between the soil and the base. It also fills the leaf nodes in the core with little pools of water. Because remember what I said a little earlier when I had them sitting on the counter? Bromeliads at this stage pull water and nutrients out of the air. By watering it in like this, I'm boosting the humidity level right up against the plant's leaves.
But I still don't want it to rot. And even though the leaves are happy being wet, and the roots, once it's got roots, are okay being wet as well, this part in here does not want to stay wet. That's the part that will rot. For those of you who have had trouble growing these, that's probably one of the most frequent problems that people have, is that part of the plant stays wet too long and it rots.
I watch new plants for a few months while they're getting established, ensuring to water them if we go more than a couple of weeks without rain. And if I planted them in full sun, I'd probably water a little more often if it's a hot time of the year. After that, I basically ignore them. I never fertilize my pineapples, even though I grow them in Florida's native beach sand that has minimal nutrients. They're drought tolerant, rain tolerant, and heat tolerant. Mine have made it through several mild freezes without any visible damage. Although the experts do say that pineapples will die if the freezing temperatures last more than a few hours at a time. So those of you in colder climates may need to keep them in pots and bring them inside, or perhaps grow them in a greenhouse. Remember, these are tropical bromeliads. They're used to living in places like Costa Rica and the Philippines where they never freeze and they get frequent rainstorms. So, as long as the soil at their base has time to dry out between waterings, even though they don't need to be watered regularly, they would love to be watered frequently. This is especially true while the fruit is developing because pineapples can be around 86% water. It takes time to develop the fruit though. Remember that I mentioned it takes about 1.5 years to 3 years for a plant to grow? Well, after the fruit starts to form,
Yes? Go on.
it takes several more months for it to grow and fully develop before the pineapple is ready to harvest.
Do you want to make your plants produce pineapples faster? If so, here's a trick you can try.
There's a generally accepted theory that if you cut up an apple and drop chunks of it into the middle of the pineapple plant, cover it with a plastic bag, and leave it for a week while the apple rots, the ethylene gas emitted from the apple will push the pineapple to start its fruiting stage. I personally recommend against this though. For one thing, the bag can trap enough heat to bake the pineapple plant. But more pointedly, when the plant is ready to fruit, it will. If you force it to do that before it's ready, the fruit may not grow as full or as flavorful as it should.
Ain't I told you that stuff would stunt your growth?
I remember the first pineapple I ever grew. It was right here, and I was so thrilled when the flower clusters formed. Pineapples aren't just one flower, it's a cluster of flowers. As those flowers form and grow, they meld together to make segments. These multi-flower segments melting together is what gives pineapples their scaly appearance. And it's also why pineapples are, technically, berries.
So, I want to show you something that jumped out at me while making this video. Check this out. Do you see the segments? Each segment was an individual flower that formed an individual fruit, totally distinct and separate from the others. Those segments are very easy to spot from the outside of the pineapple, but over time, the segments grew together so tightly that from the inside, it's now all one flesh. You can't see where one segment ends and another segment begins. This is how marriages are supposed to be. From the outside, it's very easy to see which segment is the husband and which segment is the wife. But from the inside of the marriage, the two segments grow together. They meld together, they unify together to become one flesh. A lot of marriages, though, are more like oranges. From the outside, they look like one flesh, but below the surface, they're heavily segmented and can be very easily torn apart. Think about that for a minute, and then ask yourself, if you're interested in growing as a person, think about your marriage for a moment, or the marriage you hope to have one day. And ask yourself, on the inside, is it more segmented like an orange, or is it more unified like a pineapple? Or is it more like a banana?
But I digress. When my first pineapple grew, I was thrilled. I checked it every day wondering if it was ready to harvest, and I kept looking for it to turn a golden color because that's the telltale sign of knowing when it's ready to harvest. It'll turn a golden color at one end and it'll slowly spread to the other end. Then it's ready. So I checked it. The next day I checked it again. Then I checked it again. Every day I checked it. For months I checked it. I checked it so long that...
Did you check? Hey, did you double check?
Double check. Triple check.
Let's triple check.
Did you check, yo?
I checked the pineapple every day until one day I went out and it was just lying on the ground with a bunch of big bites taken out of it. Can you relate? I was waiting so patiently for that.
And then some raccoon comes along, takes a couple of bites out of it, and leaves the rest to rot on the ground. I mean, really.
How rude.
That's when I realized that while the vast majority of pineapple plants are clones, there are several different varieties of them. Most of them are very similar, but there are subtle differences, such as a lot of mine never get that golden color on the outside of the fruit, just on the inside. Some of mine are actually almost white on the inside with a much creamier taste to them. There's a pineapple that's pink on the inside, and as I mentioned earlier in this video, there's now a ruby glow pineapple that's red on the outside, so you can't always judge the ripeness of the pineapple by its outside coloring. After that raccoon experience, I overcorrected for the next pineapple and harvested it way too soon, which means it didn't have much flavor at all. This is because pineapples concentrate their sugars and develop most of their desired flavor profile towards the end of the ripening process.
It's not done yet.
This is why store-bought pineapples taste a lot more bland than they should. They have to be harvested early enough in the process so that they can be shipped around the world and sit on the supermarket or grocery store shelves before being brought home to sit in someone's kitchen. And unfortunately, pineapples don't ripen any further after they're harvested. They won't ever get any sweeter than they are on the day that they're plucked from the plant. The aroma does continue to develop, but that's not from the pineapple ripening. That strengthening aroma actually comes from the pineapple's sugars fermenting. In places like Mexico, there's actually a long history of using pineapple scraps to create a fermented beverage called tepache, and it's generally considered a healthy probiotic drink that can help to create a healthy gut and improve digestion, as well as lower issues with anxiety and depression. If you're not making tepache though, fermenting your pineapples is not really a good thing. It's just a small step to go from fermenting to rotting. Since I grow my own, I can let them ripen fully before harvesting them, and it takes less than a minute to transport one all the way from my yard to my kitchen, so I don't have to worry about uncontrolled pineapple fermentation. As a result, I now check my pineapples by gently grabbing the fruit and pulling it down or to the side. If it's ready to harvest, it'll snap off without very much effort. If it bends or doesn't seem to want to move, it needs more time. After the fruit is harvested, the plant will never produce another fruit.
What was that?
Similar to a banana plant, it has one fruiting cycle and that's it. However, also similar to a banana plant, pups grow up from the base. In the case of pineapples, new pups tend to grow up so close to the mother that it looks like it's the same plant. Some pineapple plants will occasionally send up pups before the mother has a fruiting cycle, and some varieties will produce more pups than others.
And the pups usually produce fruit a little bit sweeter and a little bit sooner than the mother plant. That's another similarity between pineapples and bananas.
One big difference though is that you can't grow a new banana plant from banana scraps. With a pineapple, you can, and you can use that to keep your pineapple patch growing bigger and bigger. Every time I harvest a pineapple, I cut the top off of it, and I grow another plant that will grow another pineapple, that will grow another plant, that will grow another pineapple, that will grow another plant, that will grow another pineapple, that will grow another plant, that will grow another pineapple, that will grow another plant. Thank you for spending time with me today. Until next time, I'm going to keep on growing, and you should too.